So my question is rather factual. Do you think the ancient Indian civilization has had a stronger scientific foundation than the West? And if so, can you give the examples?
See, it's a huge subject. I'm glad you had this interest. My foundation started a 20-volume series called History of Indian Contributions to Science and Technology. And IIT Kanpur professor who unfortunately passed away, Balasubramaniam, he was a metallurgist. He's done on the Delhi Iron Pillar and the Indian history of steel. We have Indian metallurgy was pioneered the disport of pure zinc through distillation for hundreds of years. Enough records on that. You look at textiles, you look at the advanced manufacturing of construction tiles in Harappa. You look at they had a binary weight system in Harappa. The weights were relative 1:2:4 like that. So you see a huge amount of very systematic scientific thinking happening in India. I have no doubt that a large amount of the Western scientific progress actually sent from India. And there is evidence of the transmission of calculus or precalculus. Infinite series came from India. There's a Kerala school which had a lot of infinite series mathematics, and the concept of infinitesimal, which is quite a breakthrough coming out of here, which is precalculus, as you all know. That's how they create the idea of calculus and so on. So Indian contributions have been enormous. When India got invaded, all kinds of universities and centers of learning got destroyed, and the people who invaded, they are not interested in learning, they're just interested in milking the system, and the system had a huge amount of wealth until 1750, according to the Cambridge History of World Economics. There's a World Economics multi-volume Cambridge history. They've done this. Until 1750, India had 24% of world GDP, and the West, as defined in United States and Europe combined, had less than say 7-8%. India was a bigger economy than the West by 3 times. And in 90 years, India got deindustrialized down to less than 2% of world GDP, and the West became more than 80%. So you have to understand the history of what happened in that period. What happened in that period, the dismantling of education, the dismantling of manufacturing. There was a guy called Dharampal. He was a Gandhian, and we gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award soon before he died, some years ago. As a young man, he sailed to England to go to the East India Company office, and there was no fax, photocopy type systems in those days. He had to manually transcribe volumes and volumes. He spent years and years, 10 hours a day in the library, to copy the British East India Company records of things happening in India, because they would never publish it, because why would they publish these things? He copied them, and he produced multiple volumes on some of the things that happened in the 1800s in India under colonial rule, when technology and manufacturing were disassembled and brought down and outlawed. Steel was an Indian innovation. Even in very early times, Greek records and Roman records show that the toughest steel for using it as armament for a shield and for a sword, they would buy from India. It was called wootz steel, W-O-O-T-Z, steel. And this steel they could not make, but it was brought from India. That's how steel was. British learned they did a lot of R&D to understand how steel is made. And another interesting thing few people know is that when London Bridge was being constructed, the East India Company concluded that the best steel to make it would be imported from India. A large part of the London Bridge steel was from India. That's the London Bridge today. Now, the steel industry in India was outlawed on the basis that people can make guns and they can use it for weapons and it will be hostile, all kind of arguments given, and it was outlawed, steel industry. And this Jamshedji Tata, who is the founder of Tata, had to plead with the British for a very long time to get permission to start Tata Iron and Steel. And the permission was given for only a very small quantity of license, that he could build only so much, because the British didn't want competition. So for a very long time, Indian steel industry disappeared. It all had to be imported. And then Jamshedji Tata started one small unit. That's all there was. So when you look at what has happened to science and technology, I'm very sad that I spent so many years developing this 20-volume series, out of which 9 volumes are ready. I tried to convince Penn IIT, why don't IIT people take this up? It's not my job, I'm one guy. Why don't IIT people introduce a course on history of Indian science and technology so that technocrats know all this? Why don't they take over the publishing of these books, because it's very difficult for me to go around, marketing these books. Penn IIT or IIT or some particular IIT should take over the project. I'll be more than happy to donate, contribute all the work I've done over 15 years with the help of so many scholars, 30 or 40 scholars that we've funded, so that the work can continue, so that future generations can understand the history of Indian science and technology. Because nobody else is going to do it for you. It's the Indian people who are going to do it. So what better place than an IIT to have such a project? I started this entirely on my own, and I haven't got any support from anybody. But your question is a very important question on Indian contributions to science and technology, which are not adequately understood and appreciated. And it takes 3 years for each of those volumes. Some expert professor somewhere in India, some technocrat, some historian have to work together to, each volume takes that long to do. But there is a wealth of information.